Okay, so in the second and final part of this series, looking at the Deep Space Nine figures from Art Asylum or Diamond Select, I'm going to be taking a look at the Klingons. Now, one of the things that I've criticised this line for, whilst being fairly comprehensive when it comes to making the crews, they didn't really exploit a lot of the supporting aliens and adversaries that these TV shows had. And as a result, this line often felt a little bit stale, that it just looked a little bit uniform. It was usually always, Starfleet characters in the same uniforms replicated over and over again. And whilst we love these characters, they are obviously the core of the shows, it really would have been awesome to have actually just fleshed out these worlds. So they just looked a bit more visually interesting on the shelf. But I'm really pleased to say that one area they didn't neglect was the Klingons, and these are obviously a very strong visual characters that we see across multiple series of Star Trek, and I'm really pleased that we actually got quite a number through the DS9 line. So I'm going to start by taking a look at Wharf, and this is the Wharf from the Wharf and Gowron 2-pack. Now, the first thing you may notice about this version of Wharf is that he is the only one in this entire line that has the Season 4 outfit with the colouring on the shoulders. So as it stands, he looks a little bit strange in the collection because he doesn't really feel like he belongs with any of the other figures. Now, in terms of the sculpt, it is the exact same head sculpt that we've seen before on Wharf figures. We've seen this sculpt in the Next Generation line, we saw it on the Nemesis figure, and we're seeing it again here. And whilst I think it would have been fun to have a different look for Wharf across some of these figures at different variants, that said, I do feel like, well, why mess with perfection, because this is a pretty strong sculpt. And I think the likeness, when we compare it with an image of Michael Dorn here, it looks pretty much perfect. I can't really fault this. I think they've done a really tremendous job of this likeness, so yeah, why not use it again? The body mold they've used is pretty good. He's a slightly taller figure than others, slightly bigger frame, which is fantastic. And of course, he does have his Klingon sash, which looks awesome. I love like the various paint apps that are running through this, the different washes on it to just really enhance the sculpt and the mold there. And it is fairly loose and flexible as well, so you can move it around, but it also fits nice and snugly. It doesn't feel like it's gonna, fall out of place or look too loose. So it's kind of ideal what they've done here. The costume itself is fairly bland, but then I don't think that's Diamond Select's fault, and at least the shoulders do add some much needed colour. I think it's important to note the articulation, especially as this figure will differ quite significantly from the other Klingons in this line. So for example, he has his ball jointed head, which allow him to look from side to side and up and down. The one caveat I would say is that the ponytail is a very hard plastic and isn't very flexible, so if you really want to turn his head quite significantly one way or the other, you're going to have a bit of resistance here. Otherwise, he has the ball-jointed shoulders, which kick all the way out there, which is fantastic. And of course, he has a swivel bicep, and he's got the single-jointed elbow there, bending to roughly 90 degrees. Of course, he's got the swivel at the wrist, and he's got a swivel at the waist. Again, sadly, no ab crunch. This was not something they did with this line at all. He's got straightforward hinge hips, so they just kick forward, they don't kick out to the side, and he's got a single hinge at the knee there, again bending to roughly 90 degrees, and there's a hinge at the ankle as well, allowing a little bit of movement back and forth, but not a lot. Now, as one of his main weapons, he comes with this phase 2 assault rifle, essentially a phaser rifle, and I really like this design. It shows up many times across the years in many episodes across the various series, so it's a really fun prop to have, and I'm really glad that he comes with this. It's nicely sculpted, it's got some nice little paint apps on it as well, and it looks pretty decent. And I'm pleased to say he's able to mostly hold it successfully as well. Certainly, his right hand grips it nice and tightly, which is great. The left one, it's a bit more of a struggle. You kind of had to bend the thumb out there to grip it, so I'm not overly keen on that because there is always a danger, of course, that the thumb will just tear off. But he can do it with a bit of perseverance, and it looks pretty good when you do it, to be fair. Next up, we have Gowron. Really, really delighted to have this figure in the collection. Obviously, was a big part of Next Generation, even bigger part of Deep Space Nine. But I think the most striking thing here is that he does seem to be a little bit bulky. He seems to have a bigger frame than the actor does in the show. He's actually a slimmer, smaller framed actor in the costume, so this doesn't look quite right. That said, I really do love the head sculpt. I think they've done a really nice job of this, and I think they've definitely captured the likeness of Gowron. Again, it's probably a little bit too broad in the face, but that's kind of depends on how you look at it with the hair and everything else. But I think, this is instantly recognisable as being Gowron, so I think they've done a really nice job of this sculpt. And I really love the attention to detail that's gone into these figures, particularly in the torso with that leather effect armour that they wear. It seems to have really captured all the little grooves and details in the necklace and the colour and the paint taps. Everything seems pretty much perfect. I couldn't fault this as a mould. I think it looks really very, very good. The only criticism I would give is that they do seem to reuse the same mould again and again with all the Klingons. And that can definitely be problematic when we compare, say, Gowron with Martok. And again, exactly the same thing can be said about the legs in these figures. The moulding itself is absolutely spectacular, and I think they've done a really great job of all the little details. But when it comes to articulation, these figures struggle. So, for example, the head sculpt here should have the same ball-jointed neck, but because the hair is that thick one piece of plastic, it is not moving. So this is a real struggle and very frustrating. It does have the ball-jointed shoulders, which kick out a good distance, which is great, and of course has the bicep there, which is fab, and a single-jointed elbow. Does actually have an extra bit of articulation in the wrist gauntlet, which is fantastic, so that spins right the way around, and there's also the extra articulation in the hand there that swivels all the way around at the wrist as well, which is brilliant. So a little bit extra here. Also has a swivel at the waist, which is great. Again, no ab crunch. And there's a swivel at the hips, so the legs do kick out, but there's also extra articulation at the upper thigh. There's actually an extra cut here, and as you can see, this allows the leg to kind of arc out. Now, it can look pretty strange, especially in that position, but it does create a few more opportunities for posing that the other figures in the line don't have, which is pretty cool. And of course, he has a single jointed knees and the arc at the ankle there, allowing the foot to really arch forwards and backwards quite significantly. Now, across all these various Klingons, there's a lot of very fun accessories, including, of course, batlets, disruptors, other blades and knives, as well as drinking goblets for blood wine, and of course casks of blood wine, and all sorts of various extra hands and fists, and even the disruptor rifle as well. So it kind of feels like they cover every major prop that we see the Klingons with across all the years, which is pretty fantastic really. Usually these figures hold their weapons pretty easily, pretty snugly and tightly there, and they look pretty decent. The one exception I would maybe mention is that the open hands to hold the blades, it can sometimes be a little bit more tricky. It don't look quite right, and they tend to need a little bit jarring apart a little bit. I also really like that on both Gowron and Martok, they have these little holsters as well, so they can put the disruptors in, and it's pretty cool. They fit nice and snugly, and it's just a nice little extra. And speaking of Martok, here he is. Really love this character in this show. Really fantastically pleased to have him in the collection as a figure as well. You will notice that he is using basically the same body as Gowron, but of course the head sculpt and the sash are completely unique. And I think they've done a really nice job of this head sculpt, especially capturing the eye there, the scarred over eye. I think they've done a really nice job of that, and yeah, I think they've done a pretty decent job of this sculpt. It's pretty fantastic, really. And as I noted, you can see the body piece here, and yeah, it is exactly the same sculpt. We have the same bands on the arms, it is the same armour underneath. The only difference is, of course, the addition of the sash, which is unique and an individual piece. But again, I'm really very pleased to have this figure in the line. I think he's really well done. As I said, the only sort of issue is because you are recycling the same bodies, sometimes you're not getting the same sense of scale, and it doesn't look quite accurate. So Gowron, who's a much smaller character, whereas Martok has a much bigger frame, they don't look quite right when they're put together. But moving on to Regent Wharf. So this is Wharf from the Parallel Universe. It's from the Season 7 episode. But for all intents and purposes, it can just be Wharf in a Klingon outfit, which he's worn many times across the years. And once again, in terms of likeness, I feel like they've pretty much nailed this. This looks, yeah, spot on like Wharf to me, so I really like it. I also really like that for once he's got his hair down, so this is kind of cool, a bit different. But I do think it's a real shame that they haven't given him his over sash, his sort of overcoat that he wears in this episode, because this is a really distinctive look that we see several times across various Klingons across the years, and it would have been cool to have a figure with this. And once again, they've given him the exact same body piece. This time he has no sash, and there are some subtle differences, which I'll talk about in a minute in terms of the arms, but otherwise their central torso, the same size, same scale, and it can be a little bit jarring when we compare it to the other Klingons. That said, it does give us a good opportunity to look at the back of the figure, and again we can see the spine work there, which I think again is another lovely little detail, and the paint apps are perfect, so I think they've done a really nice job with this. Now, in terms of the subtle differences, obviously we can see here on the arms that they're missing the bandings on this Wharf. This Wharf does not have the three bands that go around the arm. Other than that, it's pretty much identical to the other figures. The paint apps look a little bit less colourful, less shiny, a bit more dull, but that is largely it. So again, a great figure, it's a fantastic mould, really pleased to have that head sculpt. Wharf thinks it's really cool, very different for him, which is brilliant. It's nice to have that represented in the line. The only thing is, I do wish, as I said, that he could have had the different outfit with the long sort of overcoat with those long things that go right down to the feet. Would have been a nice touch. Now, there was one final variant, and this was Wharf from Soldiers of the Empire. And if you look carefully, he does actually have a slightly different mould in the torso. It's a slightly different sculpt in terms of the costume and the outfit. And of course, he doesn't have a sash. The collar is also slightly different, but the head and the legs are obviously just recycled from other Wharf figures that have gone before. But overall, a pretty fun collection. Like I said, it's really nice to have at least one alien race properly represented in the line, and I feel like there's enough diversity here in terms of the different characters to keep it interesting. Really love all the various accessories they come with, and I think the detailing in the costume and the paint apps is pretty much perfect, really. Also, they have that little bit of extra articulation that just allows them to sort of have a few more dynamic poses, because these are quite blocky, sturdy figures, so it's nice to just be able to free them up from their standard sort of stock still pose and actually have them in a few action poses, which is pretty cool. And I think when you put them together, yeah, they look pretty menacing, and they look pretty fun to challenge your Starfleet characters. So really glad we got these. I think they look really cool, and they're definitely some of my favourites in this line. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.